All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first Trans Liberation Art Coalition webinar series. So before we get started here, I just want to introduce myself and give a little background to the webinar series. That'll also maybe give a few folks another few minutes here to check in. So my name is Rhea Ewing, and I'm an artist and illustrator living here in Madison, Wisconsin. And in 2012, I graduated college and I started working on my artwork full-time. And I learned a lot of lessons the hard way from that. There were a few years where I found myself working just very intense hours, 70, 80-hour weeks. And despite all of that work that I was doing and all of the commissions and everything I was taking on, I was still really only just barely able to make ends meet at the end of the month. And I was relying on a lot of help from folks, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it also, what I was doing wasn't working. So over the last 6 years, now goodness, there were a lot of business skills that I wound up kind of teaching myself because I went to art school, and while my school did offer one business class for artists, I never took it because it was an elective course and my schedule was already overloaded with studio classes, so there wasn't really any time to take this. So I learned a lot of things the hard way, and then 2 years ago, in 2016, I was working with the Art Rate Collective, which is a nonprofit here in Madison, and I said, you know, what I really want to help artists and activists do here is not have to learn all the stuff that I learned the hard way. I don't want them to have to learn it the hard way. I want them to, you know, absorb this a little bit easier, make things smoother. So we started the Flourish series of workshops, and that was just here in town. Folks came. We held workshops on everything from marketing to pricing, building an audience, self-care, all of this stuff. Flash forward to 2018, working with the Trans Liberation Art Coalition, who is now partnered with the Art Rate Collective, and we are really excited to offer our trans artists these same tools that we've built up through the Flourish Workshop series and that I've built up through my practice. So for my work, I do mostly two-dimensional mixed media artwork. I also illustrate comics and write comics. So kind of a lot of the tools that I've built up for myself are built around that model of selling two-dimensional art pieces. You can adapt my models to three-dimensional art pieces, selling books, selling creative labor, doing work on commission bases. But a lot of what I have to talk about will apply to other things, and I have done some research into things like performances and poetry and things like that. So take this as a starting point. So in the description of this video, there are some links to my handout, what should I charge, pricing or creative labor, and there should also be a link to the pricing workshop calculators, like what I have here. So these are resources that you're more than welcome to use. The links will take you to a view-only version of the Google Documents. What you can do if you want to kind of follow along and put in your own numbers or take notes, you can just click up here where it says File, and you can either download it as an Excel file or a Word document, or my choice is to click Make a Copy, and this will make a copy of your very own that you can play with as we're kind of following along here. So this workshop's divided into 3 parts. One is understanding your end of pricing, so what goes into your artwork and creative labor, what your financial needs are, and kind of like what your minimum price is. The second part of this workshop is understanding your market, so that's what your audience is either willing or able to pay for your work. And then the third part, we'll be talking a little bit on when and if you should ever work for less than what you would normally charge. But step 1, are you losing money? So before we can figure out how much we need to charge, it's helpful to figure out how much we need. What I recommend is you figure out your yearly business expenses, your salary that you would like to make from your artwork, and then you can total those. So math, there's a stereotype about artists and math. I fit that stereotype. That's why I love spreadsheets, and because they can kind of help automate a lot of that for you. So if we go over here to our pricing workshop calculator, these are just some example expenses that I put in there. Your practice might have other expenses that aren't included in this, but this should get you started. So let's say you spend $1,200 on supplies each year. Maybe you rent a studio space, and that costs maybe $1,000 a month. Maybe in terms of research materials, that could be things like going to other people's shows, going on trips, so that would be your transportation costs there. Or it could be like buying books. So I do a lot of artwork based off around nature and science and all of these things. So I usually wind up buying a lot of resources to kind of help fill that in. So let's say you have a $300 a year research budget. So for travel, that would be things like, you know, maybe going to the Transliberation Art Coalition shows. So you want to make sure that you have a little bit of a budget set aside for that too. And again, all of these expenses will kind of vary. Education. So this is a free webinar series. Thank you, Transliberation Art Coalition, for making it happen. But there might be other things that you want. Online classes, classes at your local colleges, you know, anything that goes into enriching you as an artist and as a creative person, into enriching your business practices, can kind of fall under here. So let's say maybe you would anticipate spending $800 on that. Tool replacement fund. So if you have any equipment that you use on a regular basis, like a camera or, you know, carving tools, anything that is, you know, it's not an everyday purchase, it's a good idea to set aside a little bit of money each year so that if you need to replace that tool for whatever reason, you're able to do so. So let's say you want to put $500 a year for that. And then for promotion, later this week on Wednesday, I believe, Borealis will be talking more about, you know, how to promote yourself. There's a lot of free ways to promote yourself, but it doesn't hurt to set aside some money for business cards, to do paid advertisements on Facebook and things like that. So, you know, have a budget in mind for there. So we put in all of our estimated yearly expenses here, and then that brings us to our total, which for this example is $16,000 and $400. So salary. Salary is something, you know, it's going to depend upon what the cost of living is where you are. It's going to depend upon, are you working on your creative business part-time and you only expect it to provide for you part-time while you work on other things. You're kind of the only person that can really know this number. But when you're thinking about what you want your salary to be, try to avoid what I call emotional reasoning, and I'm very guilty of this myself, right? So emotional reasoning is where you feel like, oh, you know, I don't want to be greedy, like $20,000 a year is probably enough for me to live off of, right? Don't do that. Instead, you want to think about what are your expenses, are there any dependents that you need to provide for, and then choose a salary that will realistically fit all of your needs and all of your goals for the future. One of the things that I love about the Transliberation Art Coalition is that it's about building community and building our capacity and resiliency. So give yourself that, because the world's better with you in it. So let's see. Let's say you go through that whole process and you say $40,000 a year would be good. Next, we want to figure out, so the total of the yearly expenses plus your salary would be that's the total amount that you need to earn each year just to cover your salary and business expenses. Once we have that, we want to start thinking about, okay, how much am I actually able to work on my creative practice? So I think about that in terms of studio time, hours per year. Per year, a year is a long time to think about. Let's break that down to per week. So I personally cannot do 40 hours of intense creative labor a week. I burn out. I can do it for about 3 weeks, and then nothing is going to happen for the next month. And that's not a healthy cycle. So you want to kind of choose a pace that you can sustain. So for me, that's 20 studio hours a week. And then you also want to think about, do you want to take a vacation at some point, or do you want to make sure that you build in some sick time for yourself, things like that. So there's 52 weeks in a year. I'm just kind of assuming there's going to be at least 2 of those weeks that you're not going to be working. You're going to be doing something else. Maybe it'll be something fun. Maybe it'll be, taking time for your health, for self-care. Yeah, keep that in mind. So let's say, actually, for example, let's go on ahead and give ourselves a little bit more time off there, 48 weeks worked per year. So once we've put in all of these numbers into our calculator, and you're free to calculate these by hand as well, we have what I call our internal hourly rate. So this is the minimum that you need to earn per hour on your creative studio hours in order to not lose money. And here is the equation so you can kind of go through it yourself. So your yearly business expenses plus your salary divided by the number of studio hours you anticipate doing each year. So that's your internal hourly rate. What do you do with an internal hourly rate? This is useful if you're doing something like, say, making a painting, and you spend 12 hours on that painting. That will kind of help give you a sense of what is your time worth. Next step is to figure out your project base rate. So this is the minimum amount of money that you need to make on a specific project in order to not lose money. So, for example, earlier I talked about, let's say you did a painting and you spent 15 hours on this painting, and there were some supplies that weren't covered by your usual yearly expenses. Maybe you spent a little bit of extra money on a nice canvas or some extra materials, things like that. So you can kind of put those in this column here. That comes to this project base rate. So that painting that's in our example here, the minimum price that you would want to sell it for in order to not lose money is $1,000 and $6.25. So just to reiterate this is not your final price. This is just the minimum that you would want to try and make on that project as a whole. So quick tip, if you're kind of running out of time and you're not like starts getting a little bit too intimidating, you can always take your project base rate and double it and use that as your standard pricing. So there's a lot of advantages to that. It's pretty fast, and the reason we would want to double it is because a lot of retailers, art galleries, and other folks will, if they're selling your work or representing you as an artist, they'll want to take anywhere between 30 and 50 or 60%. So you want to keep that in mind with your pricing, that you're charging enough that even if you only receive half of that money from the sale, it still covers your project base rate. So that's a lot of math. Before we move on, I just want to touch base on all of this, that some of these numbers are things that you have control over, right? Like you can say, okay, maybe I need to try and not rent out the studio space. Maybe I need to try and work from home, and that will cut down on your total yearly expenses quite a bit. Maybe you find another source of income and you can adjust your salary a little bit. Maybe something happens and you need more income, so you need to increase your salary. These are all things to think about and to kind of adjust. But, you know, again, don't sacrifice anything that's a real need for you, because that's not what we want. What we want is that ideally, if you're getting paid for every hour that you spend in the studio, you're able to live a good life. So that's part one, understanding your costs. Are you losing money? Can you, will selling more of your work actually lead to that successful lifestyle that you want? Part two is understanding your market. So who do you want to buy your art? What's their income? How much art do they buy a year? Where do they live? And what do they know about your work? So these are all questions that I'm sure a lot of us have heard before, right? Who's your audience? And they can be kind of annoying questions, right? Because ideally I want everyone to be able to enjoy and appreciate my artwork. In terms of business models, it is useful to keep a specific buyer in mind, because the things that I'm going to do to take my artwork to a wealthy art collector is going to be a different strategy from selling my artwork to, say, people like me, who maybe don't have thousands of dollars lying around to buy a big painting, right? So these are just things to keep in mind. Once you kind of have your buyer pictured in your head, you can start doing research into what they're used to spending on artwork, how they think about art, all of that. That will vary depending upon your audience, but there are a few things that we can talk about specifically. So, how do people value artwork? Values the perception that folks have of what is a fair price for your work. As artists, as writers and other creative folks, there's things that we care about and that we will use to value our work, and those are different from how your customers or supporters might value your work. So customers, they don't really care about how much time you spent on a piece or how you feel about how it came out. What they do care about are things like, how unique is it? Where are you in your career as a creative person? Are you an emerging artist? Are you kind of a big deal? You know, what's the prestige associated with your brand? And that is a really gross sentence that came out of my mouth, but there's more to unpack around that too. The size or length of the work. People have an expectation that a small painting is worth maybe a little less money than a larger painting, even though maybe those paintings both took the same amount of time. Likewise, if you're selling a thin little chapbook compared to a big hardcover novel, there's a different sense of what those things are worth, just based off of the size or length of the piece alone. Perceived value of the materials. If you're selling something that's made out of, lots of gold leaf and ornately carved woods and things like that, that has a different impression from something that's made out of, say, found recycled cardboard. And maybe the intrinsic value of the work is still the same in terms of the way it communicates to an audience, but people will look at the materials. So it's just something that's helpful to keep in mind so you can understand where folks are coming from. Other things, how well the artwork fits into their lifestyle or the way they perceive themselves, if they can make money off of it. So in my research to understand, who might be purchasing some of these larger pieces that I make, I posed as a young, just trying to get into the art collecting world person. And I signed up for all of these art collector mailing lists and forums and things like that to really take a look and try and understand what is the culture and what is the thought process behind people who buy these really expensive pieces of artwork. And it was a little disheartening because I found that a lot of folks were purchasing art not necessarily because they liked it or because they wanted to look at it every day while they ate breakfast cereal, But they were buying it because they were betting that the piece that they were buying for $2,000 now would be worth $10,000 in 3 years. So, you know, regardless of how you feel about that, knowing that that is the thought process behind some people when they look at art can be helpful, and it can be, I found it to be freeing for me as a creative person, that it's not necessarily something personal if someone isn't interested in purchasing my work, and it also isn't necessarily a compliment in the way that I would think about it if someone does buy my work. Finally, how much are other people doing similar work in the area charging? So I live in Wisconsin, which, fun fact, is number 48 out of 50 states in terms of spending on the arts. People do not generally spend a lot of money on art in Wisconsin. In our neighboring state, Minnesota is like number 4 in the country for arts funding, so it's a much different story. But kind of having that sense of, okay, when I go to an art fair here, most customers spending $300 on a piece of art is really expensive. That's kind of the maximum that they can do, or that they're willing to do. At some shows, that number's a lot higher. At some shows, that number's way lower. If you're doing a lot of zine shows and comics expos, then kind of the prices that people are used to paying for the work could be, you know, much lower, around maybe $10 for a graphic novel, things like that. So what I recommend is you can find market guides. There are several. I have one here. So this is the 2013 Artists and Graphic Designers Market. So you can kind of look through those to get a sense of what other people are earning for their work. You can go to art shows and fairs. You can go to bookstores, shop online and things like that, to kind of get a sense of what people are charging. Obviously, talking to other folks in your community is really valuable here as well. I will say that when you're talking to other artists about what to charge for your work, there can be a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of people will kind of charge based more on how they feel about a piece than with any some people will charge based more off of how they feel about that piece of artwork rather than on how the customer might understand why does it cost that much. So in general, my recommendation is that you build consistent pricing. So whatever, you know, price range that you decide to sell your work for, or whoever your audience is, try and be consistent. So don't price your work based on how you feel at the time. I've met artists who they go to one show and they feel really great about their work and they're like, yes, I am awesome. This painting costs $200. This painting costs $800. No problem. Those prices were still pretty low. But at the next show, they were like, oh, you know, I feel really bad today. I don't think I'm that great. That painting, it's $50. That painting, I don't know. You want to give me $75 for it? Right? So that's like a really drastic difference just based off of how they were feeling that day. There's a lot of pressure to put on your emotions. Emotions are really great at understanding a lot of things. Price points are not necessarily one of them. You also don't want to change your prices drastically depending upon location. So in the example that I just cited, that was someone using emotional reasoning, right? I've also seen artists change their prices pretty drastically based on location. So you go to a gallery and you see someone's work for sale for $2,000, but if you buy it directly from them in their studio, it's only $1,000. And that's not good, because what they're doing there is they're undercutting their retailers by selling it cheaper behind their back, and that kind of damages trust. A good price is something that will build trust and respect between you and your customers and everyone that works with you. A good price will feel fair for all parties involved. A good price will feel reasonable. And a good price for your work is something that will take care of you and your needs. So for for consistent pricing, building tools to price your work, being consistent, and then building trust with your customers and retailers. Those are, if you take nothing else away from this workshop, try and take that. So we're going to get to more math now, but we can do it because we have my spreadsheet calculators, and also maybe some of you are better at math than I am. So for pricing original art, we talked earlier about things that people use to kind of value artwork in their head, and that size was one of them. So there's two ways that you can price your two-dimensional artwork by size. One is price per square inch, and one is price per inch. If you're doing three-dimensional artwork, you can add depth and calculate price per cubic inch. Or you can do it by weight, which can be a little bit trickier, but depending upon the materials and stuff, you can kind of work with that. So if we click back over here to our pricing workshop calculators, we click on pricing art by inch. So I've kind of put in some basic sizes here, and you can, in the red boxes is where you could adjust. So for originals, maybe the price per square inch, I want it to be $1. And price per inch, we'll put that at $30. Now let's put that at $20. Okay, so price per square inch for a 17 by 22 inch piece, it's $374. For a 24 by 36, it's $864. Then we jump up to $2,500, then we're at $3,600. For price per inch, it starts out higher at $780. Then we go to $1,200, $2,100, and $2,400. So as you can see, the main difference between charging price per square inch and price per inch is that square inch, the numbers start out small, and then they kind of get exponentially bigger, right? So if you do a lot of work in various sizes, where some of your paintings are really small and some of them are really large, but they all tend to take you about the same amount of time, going for more of a price per inch model will be better than charging price per square inch. And again, the difference between price per square inch and price per inch is, are you multiplying height by width by your price, or are you adding your height and width together and then multiplying that by your price to get your final cost? So when it comes to finding out what artists in your area and who are in a similar point in their careers as you are charging, you can go to shows and you can look at their art and you can say, okay, this is about a 2 foot by 3 foot piece, and they're charging a certain amount for it. So let's say we see a $1,200 piece that is 3 feet high and 2 feet wide. So we can use our reverse calculator down here to see what is their price per square inch, 1.38, and what is their price per inch, which is 20. So you can kind of like take a look at what artists around you, and again in your area, because the prices that you'll see here in Wisconsin are going to be pretty different from the prices you see in Minnesota or in Los Angeles or New York. So you can kind of use this reverse calculator to get a sense. And then what I like about this is that when I complete a piece, I can come in here and I can say, okay, my originals, I want to charge the same amount as other artists in my area, so I'm going to put the price per square inch at 3.88. Price per inch is 20. Great, that's already at 20. And now I know that, oh, I just finished a painting that was 11 inches by 18 inches. And then I can look at here, and here, this is my price. Depending upon which model I've decided to use, I know that I should charge either $275 or $580. Excuse me. Again, what's nice about that is that it doesn't matter how I'm feeling about myself as an artist that day. I could feel like I'm king of the mountaintop, or maybe I could feel like I'm the lowest of the low. This is what the calculator says I should charge, so we're going to go with that. It takes that pressure off of my emotions to tell me what I should charge. So that's for two-dimensional artwork, and again, you can adapt it for three-dimensional artwork. But I want to touch base on some other things. We're going to talk about prints real quick, and then we're going to move on into other types of artwork. So for prints, if you're using a limited edition prints, so that would be something like a series of screen prints, or maybe they're digital prints that you only made a certain number of them, and you've numbered each print with what number it is in the edition. You want to find a price per square inch or price per inch based on market rates for similar prints in your style. It's very much the same way that you would calculate price, that you would calculate the price of just an original piece. For unlimited edition or unnumbered prints, so maybe you just print one off of your own printer whenever you need it. Like, you know, you could theoretically make either 100 of them or 1,000 of them, depending upon what demand is. For those, what I would recommend is using price points. So when it comes to unnumbered prints and small items, folks tend to like to purchase those. They'll either purchase them on impulse or purchase them as a gift. And the price points will kind of vary. Price points that I like to use are like $7. Maybe $4 if it's a little tiny thing, $18. Okay, you want to get something a little fancier, let's do $30, you know? And that works for how much my prints cost for me to make, and for, again, what artists are charging in my area, and also for what I know my audience can afford. So for my unnumbered prints and my books and stickers and things like that, my target audience is basically me. I want to be making things and showing things that I could, if I saw them, I would be able to afford them. My large original pieces, I can't afford them, and that's just kind of how it is. I'm not the purchasing audience for that work. I'm the audience for that work, and that I care about the images, and I think the work's doing important things for me, but I'm not going to become a collector of giant $3,000 paintings anytime soon. Maybe in that hazy someday, but maybe not. I'm happy with stickers too. So, apologies for the transit there. Another, just touching base on the smaller items, is to think about distribution. So if you're focusing mostly on smaller price point items, so again, that's anything I would say $30 or less, make sure that you come up with a plan for how to sell enough of those things to cover your costs, and also think about how you'll reach new markets once your current market is saturated. So if everyone in Madison who likes bees buys a print of my bee art, that market is saturated. They already have that art. There's no one left in Madison to buy it that likes bees. So that market's saturated. So then I need to think about how can I expand out, maybe towards Milwaukee, towards Minneapolis, towards Chicago. You know, again, things to think about. So moving to other situations where maybe you're not selling a specific art object, let's talk about commissions. So with commissions, that would be something like someone pays you to do an illustration for them or to design a brochure, things like that. There's two ways that you can structure your pay. One is by the hour, and the other one is by the project. So which one's right for you kind of depends on your ability to predict and use your time effectively. So hourly rates punish efficiently. So if the product you're providing is the same quality, who cares if it took you 5 hours or 500? As creative people, we've put, you know, thousands of hours and years into honing our craft, and that enables us to do things faster, and that skill should be valued. The other advantage to, or the other downside, I guess, to charging an hourly rate is that sometimes clients can get a little obsessed with how you're spending all of those hours. In general, that's not a sign of a good, healthy working relationship, but it is something to be aware of. Project rates. So project rates is where someone says, hey, I need you to design a logo, and you say, great, that'll be $2,000 or whatever your price is. Downside of project rates is that they punish optimism. So if you're not that great at predicting how long it will take you to do something, or if you wind up doing a lot of corrections from particularly picky clients, you could wind up losing money on a project that wasn't quoted correctly from the start. So kind of a way that you can sidestep this is that you want to have a fail-safe. So you want to have like a signed agreement that after so many major corrections, your hourly fee will apply on top of the project rate. And that's just something to kind of work out there. So for project-based fees, you want to make a rough estimate of how long the project will take you. Then you want to add time for at least 3 major things to go wrong. And then you multiply that by your internal hourly rate, and then that's your base rate for the project. So if we go back to our calculators for an example here, we have our internal hourly rate that was calculated from this sheet here. We anticipate that the project will take, if I just sit down and do it, that'll take 8 hours. However, if 3 major things go wrong, my client hates my first design, we wind up having to start all over on color schemes, kind of picture what all of that could take. And let's go to, maybe we're closer to 14 hours at that point. Then the other piece of that is, our internal hourly rate. So that brings us to our project base rate. So now that I know that the minimum that I need to charge for that project is $647. Again, that's the minimum. Maybe market rates push that up higher. Maybe they push that lower, in which case maybe I need to adjust my business model or my efficiency with working and all of that. So one resource that I definitely recommend if you do two-dimensional artwork or design work is the Graphic Artists Guild, sorry about that, Pricing and Ethical Guidelines Handbook. So this is their 13th edition here, and this is their 14th edition. And this is a really valuable resource because they list rates for advertising and promotion for various fields, design, animation, illustration, book covers, all kinds of things. So on the screen here I have an example of book cover illustration. So if it's a major trade, that's $3,000 to $4,700 is kind of the range that people expect to see. Artpack.com, that is actually a mistake. That site no longer exists. Very sad. If a project is very unusual and you're not sure how long it will take, so let's say you're asked to do a mural and you're not normally a mural artist, or there's a lot of strange requirements like it's a pop-up book and there's all of these extra little engineering things to figure out, then what I would say is do an hourly rate instead and carefully log all of your hours. There are a number of apps that you can set up on your phone or little browser extensions that you can use to kind of track the hours that you spend on something, and that's also useful for your own practice as well. Copyright and licensing. So licensing is when you give someone else the right to use your intellectual property. So the more rights that you give someone to use your work, the more you should charge them. So if those rights are exclusive, you also need to, your client needs to pay you more to make up for that potential lost income. And so a full transfer of all copyright could cost like 500% more than a regular commission. What that means is if someone wants to pay me to do a piece of artwork for them that they just want to have it, and they aren't necessarily going to sell anything with that artwork on it, and they're totally okay with me selling the artwork as prints or all of these other things, then
maybe for that little drawing it would be like, you know, $500. Cool. That would actually be a lot for a little drawing from me. A painting. So if they were asking for that same piece of artwork, but they wanted all of the copyright associated with it, they want to be able to sell merchandise with that artwork on it. They don't want me to do anything with it except maybe put it on my portfolio site. That's going to cost a lot more. That might cost 5 times as much. So that instead of $500, maybe it's $2,500. So thinking about that, and also make sure that you're communicating with your clients, because sometimes inexperienced clients commissioning artwork will just assume that they'll have full exclusive copyright to the work that they commission. So communicating with your clients about what they need, how many rights that they need, what's their budget, and making sure that you have written agreements for everything is really my advice there. And if someone isn't willing or able to negotiate those things with you, don't work with them. Your time's worth more than that. For self-published comics and books, you can, Iron Spike, creator and owner of Iron Circus Comics, and successfully kickstarted more than 6 at this point, quite a few graphic novels. She uses the formula of your printing cost per book times 3 to make your cover price. You might, again, need to adjust that to hit certain price points, but it's pretty good. And I definitely recommend, if you do any self-publishing at all, whether or not you use Kickstarter, go and purchase Iron Spike's Let's Kickstart a Comic for more information, because what she has to offer for self-publishers is just really incredible. If you're working with a publisher to sell your poetry, prose, anything like that, usually those are done for an advance plus royalties. Sometimes anthologies or collections of work will be a flat rate fees, or they'll only pay in royalties or by the word. Research and consult guidelines specific to your field. In general, you want to expect between 8 and 15% for printed novels and 25 to 50% for ebooks. And in terms of advances, so an advance is the amount that your publisher expects to earn on the project, and so they go on ahead and pay you a certain amount of your royalties just upfront, so that you're not taking on all of that cost. In general, if you're offered a publishing deal, you want to look at the advance as a reflection of what your publisher expects to earn on the project. So some professional organizations consider $2,500 to be the minimum professional standard for an advance of something like a novel. If you get offered a lot less than that for a book, even if they reassure you that, oh, don't worry, you could make it up in royalties, kind of keep that in mind, that if there's a certain, they're asking you to take on more of the risk there than maybe you should. The advance is a shared risk. You're both saying, I bet it will sell this much. If it's all on you, then they have a little bit less incentive to try and make sure that they sell enough to earn back your advance. So just something to think about and be wary of. For articles, so that would be maybe nonfiction, you're doing arts writing, food writing, things like that. It could be 20 to 30 cents per word for article feature writing, for reprinting articles. You know, again, we have a pretty broad range here. These are all from the 2015 Writers Market, which is a book similar to the ones that I was showing you earlier. Definitely, if you can get connected with any professional networks or market guides for your field, I would definitely recommend doing that. Especially if you find yourself glancing at some of these numbers and feeling a little bit of sticker shock. You know, really check those things out, because it can be very freeing to realize how much your work is worth and how much it's okay to ask for. So poetryhasvalue.com has a list of journals that pay, with guidelines of how much they pay per poem or per page. Most journals fall in the range of $10 to $200 per poem or per page, with a maximum cap ranging between $50 and $1,000. For performance artists, WAGE recommends at least $20 per hour for all of your performers, and $100 to $200 a day for performers enacting an art. So that means that if you have a piece that's only going to be for a couple of hours, try and pay those performers $100 instead of $40, because even though they're only doing a couple of hours of work, there's still that kind of minimum day rate. And other thing for performance art is that venues, you kind of want to expect to pay $600 to $6,000 to the artist in addition to the fees for the performers. So that can kind of adds up. ActorsEquity.org has information for pay for theaters in various venues. That's something that I don't personally know a lot about because I've never done that. I haven't ever been involved with theater, but definitely, reach out and check out those resources and think the tools, again, of thinking about what your financial needs are and where the market is are invaluable, regardless of what that market is, what you do. Just knowing that there are those two pieces and you need to bridge them, it helps so much. So I don't see any questions on the live chat, so I'm going to go ahead and move into part 3. If you do have any questions, or if I've kind of glossed over something, feel free to speak up in the chat, or you can reach out to me by email or on Instagram. So we're going to move on to part 3, which is when, why, and if you should work for less. So remember earlier we were talking about emotional reasoning, something that I'm definitely super guilty of sometimes. Sometimes we just say okay to things that maybe we shouldn't, and we wind up working for a lot less than what our work is worth. Or very often we're, as artists and creative people, and also frankly as trans people, we're asked to work for less than our work is worth. So there's disadvantages. Working for cheap diminishes the amount of money that you can charge for similar work in the future. It attracts more clients looking for cheap or free labor. That was definitely a lesson that I learned the hard way when I was first starting out. There were times where I, did book covers for really cheap, like $200 to draw a really elaborate book cover for someone. And I kind of assumed that if I did that work really cheap, it would attract more people who could maybe pay me more money. That's not what happened. What happened is I got more people with $200 budgets approaching me and asking me to do the same thing that I had done for this other person. So you kind of want to think about that. What is this? Do I want to do more work like this for cheap or for free, or do I want to try and grow to something else? The other thing that working for less than your standard rate can do is it can damage trust between you and your audience. So if person A finds out that they're paying 3 times what person B had to pay, they will come to you with questions. And you can have those conversations and kind of navigate those spaces, but it is a challenge. So I'm going to talk about some always bad reasons to work for less. Always, always, always. So nobody's buying. If nobody is buying your art, instead of undercharging your prices and going less than your project base rates, try reevaluating your market. Maybe you're showing your art to people where it's just not their thing, or they can't quite afford it. So you want to find people who can both afford your work and who resonate with it. Another thing that you can think about with regards to market is how you get people to resonate with your work. Sometimes that can be through adjusting things in your presentation or the way that you talk about your work and your storytelling. For me, I have there's a fair amount of backstory and research that goes into all of my pieces, and I found that expressing that and making sure that people understand the full depth of my images and the meaning behind them is really important for them to connect with it. And again, if they connect with it and they are able to afford it, that's what leads to a sale. The The other thing that you can do instead of charging less is to revisit your work. So if you are absolutely sure that you have found the right audience and that audience should be able to afford the prices that you're charging and still no one is buying, you might need to improve your craft or change your product line a little bit. And there's no shame in realizing that you've reached that point. You know, instead of doing, running yourself ragged, undercharging what you should and selling a bunch of like really cheap pieces and kind of doing the same thing over and over again, instead take that time to invest into your skills and into your business and your creative practice as a whole. Take time to explore things without the pressure of sales, and kind of push and play with your artwork a little bit. That can be very freeing, and it's definitely way better than just undercharging. Another always bad reason to work for less is needing experience. If you're going to work for less than what you're worth, you might as well own the finished project. So instead of working for somebody else for free or for way less money, if you can, fund a personal project. If you're a children's book illustrator and no one wants to hire you to draw their story yet, but because you don't have any past examples to look on, make up a story and draw it. If you're an installation artist and you're looking for the perfect venue, see if you can gather the funds from your community to host that piece, and then see if that attracts other interests. Maintain that creative control and that, again, control of your intellectual property and licensing and stuff like that. Another always bad reason to work for less money than you should is that you just plain need the money. You have bills to pay, rents due, things like that. For some folks, I understand that can be reasonable to do here and there as like a stopgap, but you never want that to be habitual. So if you can, work another gig. There's no shame in picking up part-time work or taking on more hours at an existing job while pursuing your artwork. And I think that in general, if you have that option, I would definitely recommend taking it. And again, I recognize not everybody has that option. Sometimes that's just kind of how it needs to be for your survival. But what you do so that you can survive through another month should not be your overall plan, right? And again, just knowing that are there other options or not is really valuable. So those are always bad reasons to work for less. We're going to talk about some other monetary awards that people will sometimes offer artists and creative people to do either instead of being paid or instead of the full price that it should be worth. So, exposure. Someone ever says, oh, do this, it'll be great exposure, you can always reply, hey, people die of exposure out in the wilderness. I don't need that. But seriously, there are certain things that you can do to evaluate an offer of exposure. So you can think about how big of an audience will this reach really. Usually, if an organization has a large enough audience for the exposure that they're offering you to be worthwhile, they should be able to afford to pay you for your work. If that was really the case, that they have that huge audience, they should have the money and backing to be able to pay you. Another thing to think about is, what is the quality of that audience? Is this your target market? Is it going to reach people who will be willing and able to pay for your work? I talked earlier, right, about how sometimes working for free or for cheap just attracts more people looking for free work or for really underpaid work. You don't need that. So ask yourself, is having my avant-garde piece in front of, 3,000 people who, they're looking for superhero comics, and I don't draw superhero comics, right? That's not going to help you. But if it gets you in front of maybe your ideal market, your ideal audience of art buyers, or your ideal set of judges for juried shows and things like that, then maybe. It's not a yes, but maybe you can think about that more. Another thing is, would you be willing to pay this much to run an advertisement through this venue? So if a client is asking for $1,000 worth of free work in exchange for advertising, you can ask yourself if you'd be willing to pay them that much to use them as an ad venue. So sorry, I just had a moment of panic that maybe I've been talking into this thing for like an hour and it hasn't started. Oh God. Okay, no, it has. Thank goodness. All right. So if a client's asking for $1,000 of free labor in exchange for advertising, you can ask yourself, if you had $1,000 lying around, would you spend it on doing an advertisement through their venue? If the answer is yes, go for it. If it's not, maybe that's not a great deal. The fourth point is, do you have a plan to actually take advantage of the extra attention? So this is assuming that, yes, this is a big enough audience. Yes, this is the right audience for advertising your work to, and yes, it is a good deal for you. Do you have a plan to actually take advantage of that extra attention? Is your website in order? Do you have a clear call to action when your target audience finds you? You know, things like that can be the difference of the rarest of unicorns, the good exposure opportunity actually being worthwhile, and it just being kind of another drain on your time and energy. Another thing folks will offer sometimes instead of money is education or prestige. So this might sound like, oh, you'll wind up with a great portfolio piece, or people who work for us go big places. The first step is just getting published. The idea is that what you'll learn on the job and the prestige that you'll get from working with this company or whoever this is will be worth the loss to you and your business. A lot of artists and writers will encounter this in the form of getting an offer to show at a really prestigious art gallery, but the money isn't really there for whatever reason. Or, oh, like, we'll publish your poetry anthology, but, you know, we can't afford to pay you in advance, right? So just like with exposure, there are ways that you can analyze this offer. So do the people you'd be working with actually have the knowledge and experience that you want to gain? That's kind of step one. Two, what is this organization's reputation within your field? So are these people that everyone kind of knows, like, oh, I don't know, they kind of take advantage of people and we don't really like that? Or are these people that really do hold weight in your field amongst other professionals and your peers? Three is, will you have opportunities to network and make connections the way that you want to? If education and prestige or the ability to expand your network is your main reason for wanting to do it, make sure that you'll actually have the opportunity to talk to other folks. Make sure that the big name curators that you're really excited about will come to this show will actually be there and you'll actually get the chance to speak with them. Another thing to think about is, can you find a similar opportunity that does pay and pay well? A lot of times we can kind of get tunnel vision as like, oh, this is, I either take this opportunity or I don't. It's either this or nothing. But the reality is that there's a lot of places for your work out there in the world, and you don't have to rely on any one offer as do or die. Finally, the other thing to think about is, what are people who have worked with them in the past doing now? If you're a animation student and you really, really want to work for Pixar, and there's an internship program that a lot of artists who now work at Pixar have gone through, yeah, okay, maybe think about that. But if someone's offering you an internship and they say, oh, it'll be really good for working at Pixar someday, kind of look at who goes through them and, you know, what are they doing now? Is that really true? Other non-monetary rewards. Now we're going to get into some more fun ones, right? So the previous two are a little skeevy, right? Like, oh, do it for exposure, do it because we're cool. That's a little weird. I want to talk now about social capital. So social capital is when you do something because you feel that the wider social benefits to your community, your relationships, or your reputation will be worthwhile. So this could be something like doing a cheap gig for a friend, giving your mom a free painting, or giving your favorite nonprofit a steep discount on design services, or performing at a charity event, right? These are all types of social capital. So when it comes to evaluating those, you want to think about, does this project or opportunity align with your vision, both for your creative career and for your community? If a nonprofit that works on a lot of housing instability issues approaches you and say, hey, we want you to do this project, do you like the work that they do? Do you feel like they are making a difference? Do you feel like they help or hurt your community? If it's in line with you, then great. And if there's things about it that make you a little uncomfortable, maybe you could take on a different opportunity instead. Like, you don't need to do that. The other question is, does the other party know the usual value of your work and understand that you will be working at a loss? And this is a really key point, regardless of who you're offering this work to. Having that understanding that you are giving them a gift, which is a certain percentage of your time and energy for free, that's really important. And it's important also so that they can respect that gift and see, are there other ways that they can support you or that they can make it count as much as possible. So that also kind of leads into, can you trust the person offering you social capital to respect your time and boundaries? So if a friend approaches you like, hey, can you help me with this logo design real quick? And you know that, oh yeah, I'll sit down, we'll do this, it'll be fine, no problem. But if maybe they're like a picky Peter and you're going to sit down and make this, and then they're going to want a whole bunch of changes later and it'll kind of draw out, that may not be the best person to offer that time to. Are you comfortable with the other party's needs and business practices? Again, does that align with your vision for your career and your community? And then finally, does the other party understand your needs, and are they willing to work with you to meet as many of those needs as possible? So maybe they can't meet all of your financial needs, but can they support you in other ways? Can they make sure that they're introducing you to people in their network who could maybe help you more? Are they making sure that maybe they can't cover all of your fees, but they can cover supplies and transportation? Things like that. And you can open those conversations, and if it's a healthy relationship, you should be able to have that connection and be able to say, hey, I want to help you guys out, but I need help getting transportation so I can go across town and lead this workshop, Again, those conversations, and if you can't have those conversations with someone, maybe that's not where you want to be putting your time and energy. Another quick tip for friends, family, and organizations that you love, it can be really handy to just have a standard discount that you offer. It's your friends and family rate. It's your organizations I love rate. So what that allows me to do is I don't have to rely on my emotional reasoning, because that could be all over the place. And it also ensures that my discounted rates are at or above my base rate. So maybe I'm charging less than I would normally, but I know that I'm still not losing money or getting further away from my financial goals. 10 to 25% off is a standard discount that you can offer. And again, there are situations where you might work for less than your standard discount. In general, when it comes to working for less than what you would normally charge, my advice is to look for opportunities that are more collaborative and based off of shared risks and rewards. And in general, martyring yourself for your career is not a reasonable strategy. At the end of the day, you can't buy groceries with exposure or education. You can't pay your student loan debt with social capital. And with all of these things, you want to realistically evaluate your situation and decide how much of your time and resources can you reasonably afford to invest. You are worth that. You do not need to put everything that you have into something to be worthwhile. It's okay to just be, and it's okay to say no. Also handy, I have a list here in the handout of ways that you can say no. You just say, that's not a great fit for me. Unfortunately, my schedule is too full to pursue this opportunity. I can't meet your budget requirements at this time. No. And you also don't have to say anything. If an offer comes from a source that's not respectful of your time or sounds like a form letter, you're not obligated to respond. I do get emails every now and then that are basically form letters that have clearly been sent out to a bunch of artists looking for free or cheap work. And, you know, it's okay to just delete those. You don't have to write out a detailed reply if someone's didn't bother to write out a detailed ask. Again, if you decide to work for free or at a loss, make sure both you and your buyer understand the value of what you're giving away. Understand exactly what it is that you hope to gain that's not money, and then be prepared to fully utilize that gain if it comes. 3 is to see what you can be compensated for. Anything that helps lessen the financial blow is better than nothing. 4 is to be clear about contracts and agreements. Don't give away more than you have to. And that should be your policy in general, but you want to be especially careful in this case, and especially careful with friends and family, because someone doesn't have to be malicious to give you a bad deal. And when you have at least the basics of what everyone can expect lined out before you start in the form of an agreement, it can just really help avoid a lot of misunderstandings and frustrations later. In my experience, mismatched assumptions going into a job, they can cause a lot of damage to your professional and personal relationships, and it's a lot of stress. And again, you don't need that. Make an agreement. 6, have clear boundaries about your time and energy. Structure the project in a way that helps everyone respect those limitations. And then 7, have an exit strategy and agree upon it in advance. If you're being mistreated or your boundaries for this project aren't being respected, be prepared to step back. And again, you're worth that, and your time is worth that. So to kind of wrap things up here, in general with pricing, your goals are to build trust with your audience. You want to be ready to communicate about why your prices are what they are, and to be consistent across all of your venues. And you also want to have clear boundaries about when and if you work for less. Success with pricing means that if all of your work is selling, and if you're getting all of the gigs that that work for you, that you can handle, you should be living a stable financial lifestyle. You should be able to pay your bills. You should feel like you're adequately supported in your community, and that you're appreciated. If you find yourself working really long hours or undergoing a lot of stress, if you find yourself wondering how you're going to pay for the bills every month, even though you're working really hard, those are all signs that something's wrong, whether that's with the prices that you're charging or with your ability to connect with your market and your audience. If you find yourself in that position, just know that that's not your fault. I live in Wisconsin. I mentioned earlier that's number 48 out of 50 states in terms of spending on the arts. It's really hard for me to make a full-time art career out here. And in a lot of ways, I kind of don't. I get a lot of help from my partner and from my family to kind of help make things happen. If I lived in Minnesota, that would be different. And I know that. It's a market problem. So there are ways that I can build those markets and kind of spread that out. But just having that knowledge of it's not my worth, it's not your worth, or that the value of your work, it's just making those connections and figuring out how to navigate these spaces. So I hope this was helpful for you. Again, the spreadsheet calculator tools, along with this handout that I've been exploring with all of y'all, they're links in the description. And you can edit them by clicking on File and then Make a Copy. And then you can fill out all of the red highlighted cells to use the calculator. I also have a list here of general resources. These are resources that I found really invaluable for my own work. And again, these are all on the handout. Katie Lane has a blog called Work Made for Hire that's really valuable if you do any kind of freelance work. ArtBiz has a flow sheet for project interrogation. There's the flowchart for Should I Work for Free? ArtSpace is it's a site more specifically for art collectors. That's one of the sites that I posed as a up-and-coming art collector on to try and figure out what the mindset behind all of that was. The NPPA has a cost calculator for photography that's really valuable. The American Media Society, or the American Society of Media Photographers, excuse me, has a pricing guide as well. I've already talked about the Graphic Artists Guild's Handbook for Pricing and Ethical Guidelines. There's the Tumblr Dear Art Director that has a lot of really great responses just for working in the business and getting your work out there and handling contracts and pricings and stuff. For writers, the Writer's Market Handbook, poetryhasvalue.com, Journals That Pay. There's also, if you are interested in children or young adults, writing or illustrating, Skibly is a really great organization. I'll add that to this handout. For self-publishing and for comics, everything that Iron Spike has to say is pretty great. So you can purchase the Let's Kickstart a Comic on ironcircus.com. For performance art, there's wageforwork.com, and for live theater, actorsequity.org. So thank you, everybody. I hope that this was helpful, and if you experience any problems with accessing the webinar or with the sound quality or anything like that, don't hesitate to let me know, and we'll try and smooth things out even more for the next time. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to team@transliberationartcoalition.com, or you can reach out directly to me. And y'all are awesome, you're going to do awesome, and you're so, so very worth it. All right. Bye.